Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. My name is Eric Neiberg, and I'll be your host today. I'm a Chief Operating Officer here at Scrum.org, and we're going to talk about real engagement for real results. I'm joined by one of our professional Scrum trainers, Srinivasan, as well as one of his colleagues, Gervase Bushe, who will take you through today's session. Next slide. Just real quick, your microphones will be muted throughout. The session is being recorded and the slides will be available within about 24 hours as well as the recording. Please ask your questions if you have any in the Q&A tab, which you should see in this view, and everybody's probably very familiar or too familiar with Zoom and the way it works these days. Next slide. Just briefly, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is founded by Ken Schwaber. Ken is our chairman and co-creator of Scrum. We provide things like thought leadership. So this webinar to help you learn and grow and continue to understand the Agile community and how to do that, which is kind of combined with that ongoing learning. We provide training as well as certification in a mission to help people and teams solve complex problems. Next slide. And with that, I will let Ram and Gervase introduce themselves.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, greetings, depending on the time zone you're in. And my name is Ram Srinivasan. I'm a professional Scrum trainer and a certified Scrum trainer, and I help organizations with their Agile transformations. And today I am with Gervase Bushe. And Gervase, thank you very much for joining me. And Gervase is one of the thought leaders in the field of leadership and organizational development, and author of multiple books, including Clear Leadership. And he's also editor of other reputed HR and OD magazines and publications. So it is my honor to actually have Gervase here. And thank you, Gervase, for actually collaborating on this presentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. And most of you seeing this webinar know about the Agile Manifesto. And the very first thing in Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over process and tools. Individuals and interactions over process and tools. And the last statement reads, yeah, that is, while there is value on items on the right, we value items on the left more. That is, individuals interactions has more value than process and tools, which still has some value. Okay, the challenge with that is about the interaction dynamics between individuals. When individuals start interacting, it kind of gets sometimes messy. Now somebody says, you're not listening. And someone gets defensive, say, I was. And there is all these thoughts emerging in them. It's like, yeah, I saw you checking your cell phone, but there's a private thoughts. People don't share it, and the other person's also having their own private thoughts and they don't share it. And over the course of time, it becomes messy. Individuals and interactions is not easy. It's the whole thing around collaboration, around partnership, around teamwork. Okay, we talk a lot about it, but we're going to dissect the dynamics between individuals and interactions in this session. Okay, so why do we really do this? It's because it's actually foundational to psychological safety. Now, especially when people are working in groups and teams. Is it safe for me to share things here? Will I be judged? Will I be shamed? People want to actually develop trust within teams and between team members. Are you dependable? Are you trustworthy? And we need to have the ability to think together. I want to share my thoughts. I want to share my wants. I want to share my needs. I want to know your thoughts, your needs, your wants, and about motivating and being committed. Do I know what you need? What can you expect from me? What can we expect from you? How can we committed to each other's expectations? Some questions that come up, especially with teamwork, about alignment and support. If I really don't know what you want, how would I even be able to support you? And if I'm supporting you, how do I know that the level of support that I'm offering you is helpful or not helpful? And finally, we can talk about Scrum values. Okay, Scrum value of openness, Scrum value of respect, and Scrum value of courage. And the question then becomes, how can we embody openness, respect, and courage in such a way that we invite collaboration. And I can give you a counterexample. Imagine people are in a meeting. Somebody says something, openness and collaboration goes right out of the door. So let's actually talk about a small story, a real life story that you might have actually seen. Bill. Bill is the product owner. He just had his call with the headquarters and he is late for his sprint planning. Product owner obviously needed for sprint planning. And as they're waiting for Bill to join, now it's about 10 minutes. People are coming, people are waiting, people are really having small talk and stuff like that. And they're really paying close attention to Bill, what he says, his tone of voice, his mannerism, and all those kind of stuff. And Bill joins saying, apologizing, hey, sorry, folks, I'm 10 minutes late. And they proceed with sprint planning. They craft the sprint goal. They talk about what product backlog items we need to talk about. And the Scrum team's really figuring out what is the sprint backlog and all this kind of stuff. And they conclude the sprint planning. And then everybody goes off in their own way. And Jason and Shirley and Sam, and they're all Scrum team members. And right after the sprint planning, you might have seen this. This might not be sprint planning for you, but any other meeting for that, people are starting to talk. People are starting to talk. And they're sharing some of their private thoughts. Not all their private thoughts, a fraction of their private thoughts with people who seem to entertain those thoughts. Okay, Shirley is sharing something with Jason. Jason is sharing his observation. Sam is actually kind of sharing what he thought and what he wanted and what he felt. Okay, and Roger and Fernando and Kimberly are having their own thoughts and they're having their own private chat. If you're in the virtual world, it's a private chat in Slack. If you're in the real world, it's actually a water cooler talk. Now, the interesting thing about this is these stories don't die right after the meeting. They live on. They fade away, but they still live on. And they're also self-fulfilling prophecies. Because the moment Shirley is sharing something with Jason, Jason's looking out for that in the future. And over time, these kind of stories, they create factions and divisions within teams and within organizations. Okay, there are two important things about it. Number one, Bill, the product owner, doesn't hear any of these stories. And number two, Bill, the product owner, is probably oblivious to what might have actually happened right after he left sprint planning. And even if he was actually aware of what's happening, Bill might not be skilled enough to address this. And all this is starting to contribute to organizational interpersonal mush. Okay? And over to Gervase. Gervase?
Thanks, Ron. So there's a question from Gary about how to get people to be courageous when the director shows up. And it's really got a lot to do with how the director shows up. And that's what we're going to be talking to you about today, something we call clear leadership. And a lot of it starts with the director's behavior. Why are our organizations full of this thing we call interpersonal mush, which is where people make decisions and take actions based on stories they're making up about others, but they're not actually checking out. Right. So that in the story that Ron just described to you, this is what's going on. A meeting happened, people leave the meeting, they're talking to each other in little groups, they're trying to figure out what's going on in Bill's head, why is he acting the way he's acting? Nobody asks Bill. And I hope that's a familiar experience for you, because that's what we're here to talk about. And most fundamentally, to recognize that we're sense-making beings. This is part of the human condition. We're compelled to make sense of others. And so what we do is we fill in the gaps of what we know about their experience. And typically, if I work for Bill and Bill's doing something that isn't making sense to me, I don't think it's particularly a good thing, do I go talk to Bill about it? Often not. I go talk to Sally about it. And we get together and talk about why is Bill doing what he's doing? And over time, we develop a story about it. Right? And one of the things that happens to that story is that the stories we make up tend to be worse than the reality. And that seems to be part of how we've been hardwired as human beings. And the idea is that over the evolutionary, thousands and thousands of years, that our brains became wired for physical danger and to be hyper vigilant for anything that might eat us or kill us or maim us, and now we live in a world that has transformed so rapidly that our brains are still wired that way, but most of the danger we now face isn't physical, it's emotional, but our brains still react to those emotional signals as if we might be killed by them. It's part of our biological inheritance. So we're overly cautious. The stories we make up about why something happened, why you didn't return my email, why you didn't say hi to me when we passed in the hall, whatever, tend to be much worse than the reality. And when we go to others to try to figure out why is that person being that way, and we develop a story, we stop seeing that it's a story and we tend to think of it as the truth, because it's not just me, Sally agrees, this is the way this person is. Let's see. So as sense-making beings, in order to make sense, future acts of sense-making have to fit with past acts of sense-making, right? Or things don't make sense. So once I start to develop a story about who Bill is, what he cares about, what motivates him, then I start to pay attention to things that fit my story and miss things that don't fit my story. And we become kind of convinced that our stories are true. And this can go on for years in an organization where people have developed a point of view, a perspective on a person or a group or what they're doing or so on and so forth. And having accumulated enough experience to tell ourselves that, yep, that's the way it is, then an OD consultant like me comes along and says, you should talk about this. And they go, well, why? What's the point of that? And I want to tell you one of the stories from my consulting practice. A number of years ago, I was working up in the far north with an organization. And in the far north, you've got these towns, you tend to have a lead company, they're very visible. This was the largest employer in the town. Everything that they did was quite visible. Their employees were also their neighbors. Our neighbors were people who used their services. And I had been working with them for a couple of years, lovely group of people, really enjoyed them. And I come flying in for a 2-day strategic planning meeting. And the day before, I go around and I talk to each of the members of the executive group just to get a sense of what's going on. The first person I go to talk to is the head of HR. And I walk into the room and how's things going? She closes the door and literally starts crying on my shoulder about how terrible things are. And there's no one she can talk to about it because, they're so visible in the community and things are going to hell in handbaskets. She can't stand her colleagues anymore. And I say to her, wow, we got to talk about this tomorrow. And she goes, no, you can't. I'm telling you stuff in confidence. You cannot bring it up. I thought, So then I go talk to the CFO. Well, he's all unhappy about a whole different set of things and is actively sending his resume out, looking for new jobs. And I go talk to the COO, and I say, well, how are things going? And again, I say to him, we got to talk about this tomorrow. And he goes, no, you cannot. I will deny it. And go talk to the COO, and she's going, yeah, the team is okay. So things are a little strained, not quite. Yeah. Talk to the CEO. How are things going? Oh, everything's fine. Yeah, it's just fine. Yeah. So we get to the next day, and I thought, I might do some exercises that would get them to about how things have been going, that would bring stuff up, but they do a great job of pretending everything's fine and nobody wants to raise it. So at the end of the day, in desperation, I do a little exercise where I have them talk about the best teams I've ever been a member of and what that tells us about what great teams are like. And then overnight, think about, what they appreciate about their fellow team members, and we'll come back the next day and start with that. And it was a real Hail Mary pass. And what ended up happening was the director of HR, VP HR, came in the next morning and she looked like she hadn't slept, which she hadn't. And she starts off by going, I can't do it. I can't do it because I don't appreciate any of you. And for the next hour, out comes all this stuff that's been going on. And what I've learned from my research is 4 out of 5 conflicts in organizations are based on a story somebody made up to explain an unhappy situation, and things start to spiral from there. In this case, what had happened was 6 months previously, this organization had sponsored a large cultural event for the community, and there was a big opening gala, and the VPHR's name had been left off the invitation list. And she had made up a story about this, about why that was, and had not attended. And everything had started to spiral for her from that point on. She thought the COO had it in for her. The COO, for her part, had noticed that this had happened, but thought, well, this was a mistake. And, you know, obviously the VPHR would understand that, and decided that since she hadn't shown up, there was another reason for that, and why bring it up, and so on and so forth. And we're off to the races. Now people are getting ready to jump ship and leave the organization. And in my experience, this is not an unusual kind of story. This often goes on because we're sense-making beings. And I've come to the conclusion that command and control organizations can function in spite of the mush. And over the last 20 years, when I've been teaching people this stuff, I'll go into a room of 100 people. I'll say, you know, how many of you have seen interpersonal mush in your organization? So everybody puts up their hand. And it's like, and do you think that's healthy for your organizations? No, everybody knows it's not healthy, but we just think it's the way it is, right? And I think one of the reasons why we invented command and control organizations is because they can function in the mush. You don't have to clear out stuff. You don't have to, you know, everybody's got a job to do. It's all laid out. People are part of the machine. You know, I used to work in the auto industry. You know, they can build a 1 car a minute, and they are full of toxic mush, right? And trying to clear it out is a problem. But collaborative work systems, teams cannot. Because what I've learned over time is it's the mush that kills partnerships. It's the mush that kills, because over time, if we don't clear out the stories we're making up about each other to explain things to ourselves, the mush starts to pile up, it gets more and more negative, and then we have divorce. Mm-hmm. And I've come to believe that the core of collaborative organizing and the core of effective teamwork is this thing I call partnership, which is a relationship between 2 or more people who all feel responsible for the success of their common purpose. That's the definition. I've been using that as kind of a dependent variable for studying what is it that organizations have to do, what is it that leaders have to do to sustain relationships where everybody feels responsible for the success of their common purpose. Because as soon as you put an authority structure into place, the move is that people will make the boss responsible, right? If things aren't going well, whose fault is it? It's their fault, right? It seems almost naturally built in. So any boss who wants to build a real team, you know, one where everybody's feeling responsible for the success of their common purpose, has to really work against this tendency, which the mush is just going to exacerbate the problems of that. And I would say that effective teams are partnerships. Effective teams are ones where everybody in there feels responsible for the success of the team. And to do that, you need leaders who use power in a way that maintains everyone feeling responsible for the team's success, right? Which goes back to this thing about the director showing up and people having the courage to speak out. How does that director show up in a way that maintains other people's sense of responsibility for success and what's going on? And to do that, we have to be able to learn from our experience together. Right? To be able to clear out the mush, to be able to keep operating in our partnership, because every partnership starts out with everybody going, this is great, you're great, I'm great, it's all going to be great. And then the mush starts to creep in. And we need to be able to clear that out. And the way we do that is learning from our experience together. Right? But our conventional image of how we learn from our experience together goes something like this. The leader calls together a meeting and says, you know, let's talk about what happened in that presentation yesterday, what we thought went well, what didn't go well, what we want to do the same or different in the future. And that sounds like a very reasonable way to do things. But that process has a deep flaw. All right, I want you to think about what that might be for a second. Clear leadership model says the flaw here is that everyone had a different experience. Everyone had a different experience. And experience is the stream of moment-to-moment thoughts and observations and feelings going on in the body, things I want, what's motivating me, what's motivating you, right? And there are 100 people on this call at the moment. And if you think about it, you know, what's the chance that any of those 100 people right now are having the same observations, the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same wants. Okay? Most people would agree virtually zero. That in every moment, everybody is having a different experience, a personally unique experience. And so what happens is when, and the question is, who's having the right one? And of course, in a partnership, everybody's experience is as valid as anybody else's. But in that learning from experience scenario I described before, we get together and talk about what happened at the meeting yesterday. The first thing that happens is a subtle or not so subtle jockeying for, well, who had the right experience about yesterday's meeting. And sometimes, one person will go, I thought the customer was really happy. Another person will go, no, I thought the customer was unsatisfied. And so this jockeying goes on. And well, what happens in most organizations is who had the right experience? Well, the boss had the right experience, right? At which point, easiest move in the world. Okay, boss, you're in charge. Tell me what to do. And at that moment, my sense of responsibility goes out the window. Now you're the boss, you're responsible. Okay? And the boss ends up wondering, how come I'm the one waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about what's going on, and other people just seem to be happy to leave work at 5. So, right? So when the boss has the right experience, partnership goes out the window. People make the boss responsible for success. And that's one way in which well-intentioned managers actually destroy engagement, even as they attempt to increase it. And this is one of the things that I've been studying now for 20 years is what are these sort of things that actually end up pulling out the rug from underneath ourselves? And part of this is understanding, and it's a fundamental understanding. And when you get this and you really start to apply it, you'll find that a lot of things change. And what I mean by get this is that everyone is always having a different experience from you. They're having different thoughts about what's going on. They're having different feelings about what's going on. They want different things. Right? Some might be a little more similar, but some might be very much different. Right? And if we're going to be in partnership, we're going to have to allow everybody to have their own experience. Right? So why we don't learn from our experience in teams? Because we've been trained to think that others are responsible for our experience. Right? That you make me, whatever, fill in the blanks. But let's try a little thought experiment for a second. Here's Jeremy. One person thinks Jeremy is amusing. Another person thinks Jeremy is annoying. Third person thinks Jeremy is creative. A fourth person thinks Jeremy is weird. Okay, who's responsible for those variety of experiences of Jeremy? Is it Jeremy? If Jeremy really took that on and tried to show up, the way he wanted to for each of those people, he'd be turned into a pretzel, right? And we've kind of been trained to think that we're responsible for other people's experience, but we're not. I can't control your experience. I can't make you feel things. I can't make you want things. All right. As a leader, what I can do is I can suppress your willingness to express that, to describe your experience. If you're afraid that it's going to be different enough from mine that I'm going to get upset about it. In which case, we can't learn from our experience because people aren't describing it. So we've been trained to keep our experience to ourselves and avoid asking people what their experience is, because we've had enough, history where we've had people in authority, our parents, our teachers, religious leaders, bosses, whatever, that when we expressed a different experience from theirs, instead of getting their curiosity, what we got was reprimand or, a pep talk, or told that we should have a different experience. And so when that happens, then people don't talk about their experience. Instead, they go off and talk to Sally and try to figure out, right? And the mush rules. And when the mush rules, what ends up happening is organizations fragment into subgroups of the people who talk to each other, trying to make sense of what else is going on. So there's the people I get together with that I trust, that I tell my backstory to, and we talk about why are those people over in marketing doing that, and why is that customer over there doing this, and we make up stories that we operate on, and organizations become composed of these multiple subgroups, each making up stories about what's really going on, all of which are inaccurate in some way or the other, right? And so that gossip and ambiguity over time reduce people's commitment and motivation, and productivity starts to take a hit in the system. And because people aren't telling leaders what their experience actually is of them, leaders can't see the consequences of their actions, Like as a consultant, I often, more than I would like, seen a leader walk into a room, say something like, I have this great new plan, and describe it, and everybody goes, and then the leader walks off and says, oh, I think that went really well, don't you? And then people scatter and get into little groups and talk about what they really think about this plan, which usually isn't pretty, right? And so, how can a leader really lead then if they're not getting information about the impact they're having? And as a result of this, people often come out of meetings not really clear about what we agreed to in there, or they might have appeared to agree to something, but they didn't really, because they didn't feel it was okay to say that out loud. And so you get a lack of real alignment in planning and decision making. You get the sort of scattered implementation that takes place, and very little capacity to learn from experience. So what ends up happening is command and control turns out to be the only way to get things done. I got into this. My early work was doing organization redesign into team-based manufacturing, and we created some amazing organizations. But by the 90s, it became clear that many of these were reverting back to command and control, and that's why I started trying to understand why the hell is that happening. And this is my explanation. It's because the mush creeps in, and after a while, it becomes toxic. And then the only way to get things done is to say, who's in charge here? Somebody make a decision. And I have a sense that a lot of this happens, especially in these days where people are trying to bring Agile into the whole organization, the Agile philosophy, and not recognizing that it's not going to work in the mush. First, you got to clear that out. And that takes some different leadership styles. So that's a bunch of ideas. We're going to open up the chat now and just ask you to any sort of questions or thoughts or suggestions, or how you're reacting to this set of ideas. Give us a little bit of feedback at this moment on what's going on in your head. So I think Lindsay's going to open up the chat for us to do that, to get a sense of that.
And while we're waiting for folks to bring that in, and the chat is open, you can chat with panelists.
You know what? I don't see it. I'm wondering if remember we got a poll. That's not the poll. We don't want the poll. I'm wondering if that's because the chat wasn't open when they first showed up. So maybe we'll do this on Q&A. Let's invite people to use the Q&A, and just anything that's kind of going on in your head from what you've just heard. Please just type away.
So we do have one question while we're waiting for folks to jump in here.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there is a chat.
Yep.
Okay, great. I see it now. So we're getting questions, but I'm more interested in kind of like, what's your reaction? Have you seen mush? Does this sound like real to you? How are you just reacting to this set of ideas? Thank you, Karen. Yes, living the mush. Sarah's going, that's totally my situation. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I'm wondering if people are having trouble finding the chat and some in the Q&A. Oh, okay. Freight Burger from New Zealand. How to approach the command and control approach. Yeah. How to encourage mush and encourage openness. How to engage senior management. Okay. All right. Any more reactions? Sounds like politics in general.
And Joel is saying in the chat that this all sounds like politics in general, and humans are deficient at avoiding some of these conversations. And kind of sticking with
we're gonna come to. We think there's some fundamental psychological things going on that people can learn about and can change. But we're gonna give you a tool right now, and I'm gonna pass it over to Ram to take us through that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Gervase. Okay, so we are really learning from our collective experience. And so how can we really learn from our collective experience? If you're experiencing something that is different from my experience, and if your truth is different from my truth, we need to have a skillful way to describe our experience such that other people get curious about it. No, we are not, they are not actually going to get defensive. We are not going to actually shame or guilt trip other people. And we are going to collectively learn from each other. These are called as learning conversations. And so the question is, how do you really make these learning conversations happen? And to that, we are actually going to introduce you to a model called as Experience Cube. And just to kind of give you a recap, when we talk about the word experience, we are using it in a sense that it is not what happened in the past, but as a reaction we create out of what happens to us moment by moment in the here and now. Okay, so my experience is my reaction, and I create it out of what happens to me moment by moment in the right here and now. Your experience is your reaction you create out of what happens to you moment by moment. So experience is more of a function of what is on the inside coming out rather than on the outside coming in. And we kind of have this model. We kind of call it a cube, and we have 4 elements that describe this cube. And the reason it is cube is because it had some layers, it can add layers to it. It's a 3-dimensional thing. So it's composed of 4 elements: observations, thoughts, feelings, and what. And observations are what we can record in a video camera. Now, the things that you see and the things that you hear. Obviously, there are other 3 senses as well: smell, touch, and taste. And those don't really play a major part in organizational life. So, things that you see and things that you hear, those are observations. And when we mean by thoughts, we're really kind of talking about ideas, conclusions, calculations, beliefs, things that we value, okay, interpretations, inferences, and all this kind of stuff. Okay, and a lot of people are having a tough time in general in organizational life to differentiate between what an observation is and what a thought is. And they sometimes mix observations with thoughts. And there is a clear distinction, is that observation can be captured in a video camera. The thoughts are something that's happening inside. And then we have feelings. And these are actually physical sensations that you might actually feel in your body. That's why you have feelings. Okay. And we have our desires and needs and ambitions and motives, and we kind of call them as wants. And we represent this as a cube because there are layers to it. I'm maybe aware of it at some point in time only on the surface. At other points in time, I'm very deeply aware of it. So we kind of use a cube. And the second assumption about Experience Cube is that we are having all these things all the time. We're having all these 4 things all the time. And the third assumption about Experience Cube pertains to our awareness. We are aware of our own thoughts, feelings, observations, and wants to a different degree. Sometimes we are aware of it. Sometimes we are deeply aware of it. Sometimes we are aware of it in a very shallow sense. Okay. And the 4th assumption is that we can all learn to be more aware of our own moment-to-moment experience. So 4 key assumptions with our Experience Cube. Okay, observations, thoughts, feelings, and wants. And we're actually going to launch a poll here with 6 statements. And I want you to kind of think about what those statements might mean. Are they observations, thoughts, feelings, or wants? Okay. And Eric and Lindsay, if you can launch the poll, that will be great.
And some folks may have filled it in previously as we had launched that by mistake in the previous segment. The poll is up again now, so we've relaunched it. So if you hadn't filled that out, please take the time and fill it out again. We apologize for that little confusion.
So there are 6 questions. And each of those statements, they're either an observation, thought, feeling, or a want. And if you can fill in the poll, that will be great. Take a guess.
So while folks are filling out the poll, there's probably some questions we could chat about. Mike asks, how do organizations encourage common purpose if they evaluate and reward based on individual achievement? It's kind of an interesting question. I don't know if you want to hold that till later. Or we can take
I'm
that
thinking
now.
we'll hold that to later,
Okay.
unless Gervase wants to take it right away. Okay, we have about 25 people filling in the poll. Looking at other Q&A as well. How do you engage senior management? And they are far more remote from the day-to-day operations.
So I'm going to close the poll now. And everyone should be able to see the results in a moment. There you go.
Okay, so let's actually talk about it. I am sad. This is a feeling. This is a feeling. Yes, you can actually feel where your sadness is. You can, if you're really trained in mindfulness practices, you can see where you can actually feeling sad. Your heart is, chest is tight, or your stomach is like crumpling, stuff like that. Okay. Yeah, I am sad is a feeling, one of the very basic fundamental feeling. Okay. I observe the group is paying attention. This is a thought. This is a thought. Okay, this is a thought. Just because the word observe is there doesn't really mean that it is an observation. Observation is a thought. We're really kind of recording it. Imagine that. And you're making some inferences, conclusions out of that. So I'm observing the group is paying attention is actually a thought. Okay, let's talk about the third one. He is sad. He is sad. This is a thought as well. This is a thought as well. This is someone else's feeling, but we're really kind of inferring that feeling. What could you observe that would tell you that he or she is feeling sad? Think about that. If you're talking about someone else's feeling, that feeling is not your own experience. How do you feel knowing he is sad? That might be a reflective of your own feeling. Okay, so think about how you concluded that they are feeling sad. Okay, fourth statement, I feel like this project will be hard. This is a thought. This is again a thought. And think about this. How do you feel about taking on this hard project? How do you feel about taking on this hard project? Are you excited? Are you scared? Are you overwhelmed? Are you angry, frustrated, puzzled? Those are all feelings. Okay, and sometimes we interchangeably use the word feeling to actually kind of say that we are thinking about it. So we don't really say, I think this project is hard. We say, I feel this project is hard. Okay, the fifth one is, I feel we should take a break. This is actually a want. This is a want. What are you feeling that makes you want a break? What are you feeling that makes you want a break? Think about it. What are the physical sensations you're experiencing that makes you want a break? Okay. And the last one is, it is cold in here. It's cold in here. This is actually a thought. This is a thought. Okay, this is cold in here. It's a thought. Whether you feel hot or cold, you are creating the experience for yourself. And everyone is usually having their own experience. I might be feeling it's normal. I'm okay with it. Someone else might be feeling it as hot. Okay, I am cold in here is a feeling. It's 65 degrees here. It's an observation. So a lot of times we are not very clear about our own observations, thoughts, feelings, and want. And we have to have that kind of distinction generating capacity to ensure we're in a place where we can learn from each other's experience. Okay, thank you, Eric. We can close the poll now. And so let's keep moving on. Okay, so talk about the experience cube. And for us to be able to learn from each other's experience, we need to master 4 skills. And the 4 skills are the aware self, where I am aware of my own experience, my own here and now, moment to moment experience. And then the second thing is, I am getting good at describing my experience to you in a non-judgmental way that doesn't really provoke defensiveness or doesn't really create shame for either myself or for others. Okay, and that is actually inviting other people to listen and understand what we are experiencing. That is the descriptive self. And the third self is the curious self. And curious self is about uncovering other people's experience. Okay, it is about really fully understanding what they are experiencing as humanly as possible, so that we can offer them what they need if we have that. Okay, it is about increasing the other person's awareness also in the same process. I might not be aware that I was feeling hurt, but the curious self in the other person made me realize that I was hurt by that conversation. I might not understand that I was angry, but actually describing myself and inviting questions that probe my feeling made me realize that maybe I'm hungry or maybe I'm happy. And finally, the fourth self is the appreciative self. And folks who are already familiar with Scrum, you're already familiar with feedback loops. And the appreciative self is about amplifying the positive in people and in the process. And what we do is we track what we want to track. And when we find it, we fan it and we amplify it so that we create a positive cycle about people being more aware of their own moment-to-moment experience, people describing their moment-to-moment experience in a way that doesn't really promote defensiveness, and helping people get more curious about one's experience. So the appreciative self actually helps people sustain the positive feedback loop. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is actually key in sustaining partnership is, when I am actually making my own stories, I have to know that I'm making those stories. And I have to be honest. I'm making these things, I'm connecting these things. This is a judgment or an inference I'm actually making. I have to really kind of label that as a thought. I'm thinking about this, and share my experience with them and be curious and be respectful about learning about my partner's experience, fully understanding that their experience might be totally different. Their experience might be totally different for my experience. And keeping in the amplification loop, the appreciative self in place, where people can amplify the team or the partner's experience of sharing their aware self, sharing their observations, thoughts, feelings, and wants. And imagine if you can actually make this happen with your Scrum team, what difference would it make in their self-management? Okay, so the question is, Ram, I get these skills. Why is this so difficult to practice? And Gervase is here to help us understand why this becomes so difficult in practice.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, if you look at what's required for partnerships to flourish, it looks pretty simple. Check out your stories, be honest to yourself and your partner about your experience, be curious and respectful of your partner's experience, and amplify the best in your partner. But people find this emotionally very difficult to step into. And I've come to believe that it comes out of this stuff that we learn in our family of origins about how to manage the anxiety of working with other people. And there's two sort of complementary processes that have been discovered and discussed by psychotherapists. And one is called fusion. And what happens in fusion is I hold you responsible for my experience in a sense of that, but not consciously, but unconsciously, there's an agreement between us. I won't do anything to make you uncomfortable or embarrassed, and you don't do anything to make me feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, and everything will be okay. And so we live in this sort of comfortable, mushy kind of place where we don't really check stuff out. We don't really surface issues or conflicts. And then what happens is, if you do say something that makes me feel anxious or uncomfortable, then I immediately try to change you so that I can feel okay. All right. And this is a very unconscious thing. And in the clear leadership programs we run, we help people really get a handle on this thing, and they start to understand it, and they start to see it, and they start to stop doing it. And the way it goes is like this. You come into my office and you say something like, oh man, I'm really anxious about that a presentation I have to do for the client this afternoon. And I'm the boss, and I start to get anxious now because you're anxious. I don't like feeling anxious. And so I say, no, you got nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. Just get out of my office. Now, that's a fused interaction. And what's going on there is that instead of me trying to understand your experience, I try to change it. Right? And so what happens in a fused interaction is people try to change the other person's experience without even trying to understand it first. And that's what causes, I think, a lot of the reason why people, the director walks in, people don't say what they really think because they're afraid if I tell you what I really think, you're going to start telling me why I'm wrong, why I should think something different, why I should feel something different, why I should want something different, right? And what bosses can do who operate out of a fused place is they can train people pretty quickly. Here are the approved experiences. Here are the unapproved experiences. If you're having any of those, off they go into the mush. Now, so that's one set of problems. There's a flip side to that, and it's called disconnection. And what goes on there is, it just doesn't even occur to me that you're having an experience. I just don't take it, I don't think about it. And so I'll say things and do things and motor along, and it doesn't occur to me that I might be having a different impact than the one I want to be having, or that you may be having a different experience around this. And it doesn't occur to me even to ask about it. Right? And we all come out of our family of origins with a tendency to one or the other. We all do both at different times. I came out of my family of origin pretty disconnected. And, let's face it, for the disconnected amongst us, the IT revolution has been a godsend. Like I even interact with my wife over email. It's like I don't have to, notice if I'm doing or saying something that might be causing her distress, right? Get a phone call. I don't want to talk to that person. It's fantastic. But both of these ways of being make it impossible to create a climate in a team or an organization where we can learn from our experience together. Both of them drive out our capacity to learn. But they happen in an unconscious way. This isn't about caring or not caring. Caring is a conscious act. So if I decide I want to change your experience because I now understand it and I now understand what you need, and I'm going to try to give you something to make you feel better, that's caring. But in a fused interaction, I don't even really know what's going on in you. I just want you to stop being that way or saying that stuff and do something different. Similarly with disconnection, a lot of disconnected leaders, when it's pointed out to them, are embarrassed. It's not that they don't care, it's just that they didn't even notice, which is really different from saying, look, I understand what you want, but I don't care. We're going to do this, which is every leader's prerogative. And clear leadership is not about let's hold our hands and sing Kumbaya together. It's about just getting clear. What's going on here? What's really going on with you? What's really going on with me? And recognizing that that will always be different, right? And that you don't have to be having my experience for us to work together. In fact, if you did, we never could work together because none of us are having the same experience, right? So what it does require is something called self-differentiation. And there's a lot of different ways to think about self-differentiation, but one of my favorite is it's my ability to be separate from you and connected to you at the same time. Right? So I'm separate from you. I know what my experience is independent of you. Right? And I know what I'm thinking, I know what I feel, I know what I want, right? But I'm also curious about what's going on with you. I want to know what you're thinking, feeling, and wanting, not because I'm necessarily going to change. I'm not going to get emotionally hijacked. But, a truly self-differentiated leader is someone who could look someone in the eye, give them really bad news, see the impact it's having, be curious about and respectful of that person's experience as they described. They're not really happy about this, but not take it on. I'm not responsible for your experience. I could say the same thing to 3 different people. I would get 3 very different reactions. And, I'm not responsible for your experience. And I can't take responsibility for your experience. And if I do, then I'm in a fused place where I'm trying to make sure that you're having the right experience, whatever that is, right? So this capacity to be self-differentiated, to be able to be in meaningful interactions with people without being emotionally hijacked, I believe this is the core of what makes it possible then for a leader to create a space where people can be describing the variety of experiences. And that's how you create really strong teams. Because a really strong team isn't one where everybody has the same thoughts or the same feelings or the same wants. A really strong team is one where I can say what I really think and what I really feel and want, and I will not get thrown off the island. That's when I really know I belong. And that's when I really know I can bring the best of myself and the best of my commitment and motivation. And that only happens when you've got a leader who's operating out of a self-differentiated place, who may get upset or anxious when people aren't thinking and feeling and wanting the same thing as they do, but they're not going to try to get other people to have a different experience so they can feel okay. Right? So when leaders are self-differentiated, they make it okay for everyone to have a different experience and to describe it. And they don't hold other people responsible. I don't hold others responsible for my experience. I create my experience. What I do hold you responsible for is your actions and your results. Whether I like them or not, that's me. That's got nothing to do with you. And it's got nothing to do with the business at hand. Right? And so when I'm acting as a self-differentiated leader, I'm encouraging a climate of interpersonal clarity. I'm encouraging people to talk about their experiences with each other, to clear out the mush, because 4 out of 5 times when people do that and they check out their stories, they discover that story is inaccurate and the truth is far more benign. Or even, and the process of doing that, of breaking through that anxious moment, of checking it out and discovering, oh, it's not that at all. That builds relationship. And that makes us more able to be able to have that next conversation where that needs to take place. Now, the other 1 out of 5 times, we discover what the real conflict is, and then we can actually deal with reality rather than dealing up with these made up stories, right? So as a self-differentiated leader, I'm not just managing the task, I'm managing the emotional field of the team and the organization, recognizing that the energy that is operating there has a lot to do with whether or not we're in the mush. Because, when you're in a mushy team or organization, it's like slogging through oatmeal to get anything done. And, I'm sure you've had that experience, right? So what they use their power in a way that sustains partnership, sustains people feeling a sense like, I'm as responsible as everybody else for our success here. We have a lot of ideas about that we could spend more time talking about. Just want to, some of the research that we found, we did a series of studies quite a number of years ago where we looked at the level of clear leadership by the person that employees identified as the key manager in their workplace. Right? So it might be a branch manager in a bank, right? It might be the general manager in a physical location somewhere. It might be their supervisor. And we found that the level of clear leadership, their willingness to be a descriptive self and to be curious about others, explains 78% of the variance and how much people trusted that person. But I was surprising that it explained 1/3 of the variance and how much they trusted each other. It was just by the level of clear leadership that was being demonstrated by that manager. And we found that managers who try to please everyone actually reduce the level of trust in the organizations. And if you understand this thing about fusion and the kind of manager who's trying to make sure that's trying to take care of everybody else's feelings and stuff, how that impacts people in kind of a negative way, you can understand that finding. We found that the level of clear leadership by the key manager predicts the degree to which people will manage conflicts openly and productively at work. And I've had a number of experiences now of being able to take this model in through the top of an organization and waterfall it down. One of them was at Palomar Health, which large health system in Southern California, $2.5 billion a year in revenues. And within a couple of years, the manager started to operate out of this sort of mindset. They saw their employee engagement scores go from the 61st to the 91st percentile of all U.S. hospitals, and that study is available. It's in print. So I think we got 5 minutes left. We'll turn to questions and ask Ron to re-engage, and we can open up the question panel. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of these questions.
Yes, I did. So Gary is asking, the skills of understanding the cube feels like mindfulness. Is this aimed at the Scrum Master role, or would you promote this within the team? And Gary, I would actually say that yes, there are some overlapping concepts and skills. And mindfulness, it's intrapersonal, but what we're really talking about is more around interpersonal. Now, I'm aware, I'm actually having the skill to describe my experience. I'm also curious about your experience. And I'm really tracking and fanning what is working. And then the cycle repeats. And this is the learning conversation we really talk about. So it's not just for Scrum Masters. It's not just for team members. It's not just for leaders. I would even say that I use it in my everyday life.
Yeah, if anybody wants to be in effective partnerships, this is a really useful set of skills. But if you want to create collaborative organizing, it's essential for leaders. That's how I would say that. Yeah.
Hitesh is saying, I think you bring out good point of clearing out the mush before actual implementing Agile. Now, yeah, I would probably say that some of the adoptions we are seeing going backwards to command and control is probably because the mush is still alive. And some of the teams I've worked with in helping them learn about these skills, the mush clears off pretty well. And the challenge here is, if the leader actually kind of starts this, it trickles down the organization, and your organization over a period of time becomes more effective. But if it's starting at a team level, then probably it's not going up. You're really kind of facing headwind when you're facing this challenge. That's my take on it. Gervase, you have other thoughts on that?
I want to respond to Mike's question about how do organizations encourage common purpose if they evaluate and reward based on individual achievement. And individual achievement and collective achievement are a polarity. And polarities are where you have interdependent pairs where they seem like they might be opposites, but you actually need both of them, right? You can't get individual achievement without collective achievement. You can't get collective achievement without individual achievement. And what happens is when we overbalance, when we, and each of those individual achievement and collective achievement are rewarding them both. Both have pluses and they have minuses. And in any polarity where you over focus on the plus of one side, you inevitably create the negative of the other side, right? And so organizations are full of these kind of polarities, and they're not stable, they're fluid, and they respond to changes in the organization's environment and what's taken on. So what's critical for sustained performance is our ability to have that conversation collectively, to have the conversation about what is our different experiences about being able to to be recognized and rewarded individually, and what is our experience of being, recognized and rewarded collectively. And right now, what works for us, and can we keep that conversation alive? And because it's going to change, but we need to keep balancing that. And I say there's lots of polarities like that in organizations. And so if we can create a climate of interpersonal clarity where people are willing to talk about this stuff and work it out, we can continuously be learning. And it's that process of talking and learning that builds the relationships and the capacity to be adaptive and agile, right, over the long run.
Yeah, thank you. And Kunal is asking how to avoid mush and encourage openness in meetings, how to gain trust of people. And Kunal, what you just saw here is a model which you can start using. And I've started using it with some of the organizations I'm working with. And sometimes what is more helpful is actually helping people get on the same page. Now, if I'm using it by myself, that can give you results, but that might not be really giving you a lot of impact, large impact. And if a team works together and really understands this approach, then you might actually kind of get a bigger, better impact. Okay, we are not really going into all the details of these skills and techniques here, given the time. And but obviously you can learn more. And Gervase, you have anything to add to that?
Well, Karen asks, thoughts on best practices for clearing out the mush. We teach something called a learning conversation. And you can read about that as well. And to Joel's thing about recommending more resources, if you go to clearleadership.com, there's a link there to our network, and all my papers are there, and you can download the first 3 chapters of the Clear Leadership book for free. Read that, get started. There's a couple of videos that aren't that great on YouTube. And if any of you want, you're free to contact me. I have a very unusual name. Google it, you'll find me in a second, and be happy to offer more ideas about where you can find more stuff.
Awesome. Well, I want to be conscious of time, folks. We're right at 3 o'clock, so or noon your time. Jarvis. So I want to thank the audience. I'd like to thank our two presenters today. I think I certainly learned a lot, and hopefully everyone else did too. If there are further questions, you can contact our speakers directly or go through us. We're happy to help any way we can. With that, thank you all and have a great rest of your day and be safe. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rick.